the body of work that I've done over the years has been to take on people in government, mostly, who were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. And many of these stories I did were in areas where we sold absolutely no newspapers. Rural Florida areas, which, like many places today, were in danger of being a black hole where no newspaper ever looked. I was a stay-at-home mother of 3 children in 1965 when a woman knocked on my door and introduced herself as the area editor of the Ocala Star-Banner. And she asked me if I would like to write for them. And I said, but I never wrote anything. Why would you come to me? And she said, well, that the librarian in the town I lived in, Crystal River, had told her that I read more books than anyone else in town. And she thought perhaps if I read, I could write. And I needed the money, so I said, okay, I'll try it. And I liked it. There were a lot of women in journalism, but most of them were writing almost society, civic club type news. And when I jumped into this, I began covering government and crime in a 2-county area in Central Florida. I remember going off to search for a lost child in the woods of a big swamp in Florida. January day, freezing cold, raining, and the only other women present were making sandwiches and coffee for the searchers. And when I came back in out of an open Jeep, soaking wet, it was they who thought, no woman should be out there in the woods with all these guys. I don't think I ever saw much difference in men and women as far as the ability to go do something. I found some advantage to being a woman, particularly to being a Southern woman. A lot of the good old boys that I was taking on assumed I was no threat at all until it was too late. I had a deputy in the Pasco Sheriff's Department who wanted to talk to me about corruption in his own department. The one deputy became a half a dozen in that department before it was over with, all talking to me about what was going on. I started work on the stories in March of '83. We didn't publish the first story until December of that year, and I think that the sheriff had reached the conclusion that I didn't find anything, and that's why we hadn't written anything, because he was used to this sort of cut-and-run journalism where you find something one day and write it the next. And the problem was that we found so much that it just took time to develop the information. They hired a lot of deputies that not only weren't qualified to be deputies, they had criminal arrest records. One was in league with the head of organized crime in the area. Actually, he was head of the organized crime unit at the Sheriff's Department, so it worked. We did a lot of stories that wound up winning the Pulitzer, but best of all, the voters decided they didn't want that guy as sheriff anymore and threw him out. I got a lot of threats during that period of time. There were just unimaginable threats. I never took them seriously, but I was followed everywhere I went. My children were harassed and threatened. I mean, there was a lot that went on. It was probably the tensest time I ever had in journalism. I said afterwards that if that's what it takes to win a Pulitzer, I don't want another one. The worst sheriff I ever took on was the sheriff of Gulf County, who was routinely forcing the women in his jail to provide him with sex, oral sex. Most of these women were women who had a history of drug or alcohol abuse and ended up in the county jail. He would bring them one by one into his office. Where sex is involved in a case, almost no one wants to talk to an authority figure who's a man. Some of the women came to me. I happened to believe the women and began to pursue the story. When I went in and began to write about it, the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Florida took it on and charged him with, I think, 20-something counts of violating the civil rights of those women. 22 women testified at trial. The case against him was incredible. He went to federal prison on it. When I got back to the office after covering that trial, which was a couple hours drive from Tallahassee where I was based, someone had delivered a bouquet of roses with a card that simply said, "From the women you believed." To me, that was the best reward I got out of taking out a sheriff, because nobody else would have stood up for those women.